Fire in the 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 fire in the
Rock on the ground, rock on the ground. Rock on the ground, rock on the ground.
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape.
water, water, run, water, run.
Air protected, protected, air, protected, air protected, air protected, air.
Just on the grave. Just on the grave.
Fire in the fire in the fire in the fire in the
Rock on the ground, on the ground, rock on the ground, on the ground, rock on the ground, on the ground, rock on the ground, on the ground.
Wind from the landscape.
Air, 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 protected.
water, run, run, water, water, run, water, run.
Shadows from the grave. Shadows from the grave.
Fire in the
Rock on the ground, rock on the ground.
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape.
Air protected, protected air.
water, run, water, run.
Shadows from the grave. From the grave.
Air protected, air protected, air protected, air protected, air protected, air protected, air.
Rock on the ground, on the ground. Rock on the ground, on the ground. Rock on the ground, rock. Rock on the ground, on the ground. Rock on the ground, on the ground.
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. From the landscape. From the landscape. The landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Shadows from the grave. From the grave. Shadows from the grave. From the grave.
Water, 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 water. Fire, fire in the house. Fire, fire in the house.
Shadows from the grave. Shadows from the grave.
Hello, Moto.
Air protected, air protected, air protected, air protected.
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape.
Rock on the ground, rock on the ground.
Fire in the 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 fire in the
Rock on the ground, Rock, rock, rock on the ground. Rock, 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 rock on the ground, on the ground, on the ground.
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape.
Air protected, air protected, air protected, air protected, air protected, air protected, air.
Shadows from the grave. Shadows from the grave. Shadows from the grave. Grave, 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 grave.
Water on the hill. Water on the hill. Water on the hill.
Rock on the ground, on the ground. Rock on the ground, on the ground.
Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape. Wind from the landscape.
Air protected, 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 air protected.
Shadows from the grave. Shadows from the grave.
Water on the hill. Water on the hill. Water on the hill. Water, 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 water on the hill. Hill. Fire in the house. 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 Fire in the house.
Shadows from the grave. From the grave. Shadows from the grave. From the grave.
Rock on the ground. Rock on the ground. Round, 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 round.
Wind from the landscape. Wind, 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 wind from the landscape. Wind, 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 wind from the landscape. Wind, 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 wind from the landscape. Wind, wind, wind.
Air protected, air protected, air protected, air protected.
Shadows from the grave. From the grave.
Water on the. Water on the. Water on the hill. Fire in the house. Fire in the house. Fire in the house. In the house. Fire in the house. Fire in the house. Fire in the house. In the house.
Rock, 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 rock on the ground. Rock, 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 rock on the ground.